The city of Teotihuacan, just north of modern-day Mexico City, was the first large urban center in Mesoamerica. It was known to the later Aztec as the home of the gods. By the time the Aztec knew of it, it had lain silent for nearly 500 years, but the impressive monuments at this site and the continued knowledge of its previous greatness inspired the Aztec. This large city covered 20 square kilometers, and there was a dense occupation of apartment-style compounds, the walls of which defined the city's streets and were laid out in a grid. The city grew rapidly between AD 1 and 150 and reached its peak population in the AD 400s with 125,000 or more residents. There was a subsequent period of decline, and then circa AD 700 there was selective destruction of the city center, the elite residences, temples, and idols associated with them. The city continued to be occupied, but with a much diminished population, and it continued to be occupied into the Aztec era. It inspired the Aztec because of its rich and complex iconography and the stories of the power that formerly resided here, and its association with the beginning of time and the gods. Because it is such a large site, it is difficult to understand archaeologically, to get adequate samples to fully represent the nature of the activities and the people that lived there. We also lack written information that is found in contemporary Maya sites and earlier Olmec sites where they have writing that tells us about the site and provides dates for construction episodes. There is some emerging evidence of some use of dates and a limited form of writing, so there may be more information in the future. But the story of Teotihuacan remains to have many chapters to be told and discovered archaeologically. This map shows the location of Teotihuacan just north of modern-day Mexico City. It is number 9 on the map, and the brown area indicates that region that was likely under its direct political and economic control. The larger green area is the area that was influenced by Teotihuacan, and its influence extended all the way into the Maya region. And we'll hear in the next unit about the Maya how the Teotihuacanos became involved in successional struggles among the Maya. This large regional center drew populations from wide areas to it, and its influence was not just in political arenas, but also economically and in the realm of ideology. Deities and religious ideals that emerged at Teotihuacan spread widely and influenced other cultures throughout Mesoamerica. The city of Teotihuacan is still occupied, and modern development encroaches upon the central part of the city and overlies many areas of the city. Some parts are preserved as an archaeological park, but others are currently under the pressure of development. The city was centered on and oriented to a central sacred precinct, as defined by monumental architecture, several pyramids, and the Avenue of the Dead. The Avenue of the Dead, or as it's shown here, the Street of the Dead, is not oriented true north-south, although the people had the capability of doing this, as the Pyramid of the Moon and the Pyramid of the Sun are oriented on a true north-south axis. The orientation of the Avenue of the Dead and the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon and other features within the city oriented to 285.5 degrees, oriented to the sunset on August 13th. In Mesoamerican cosmology, this is believed to have been the beginning of time, August 13th, 3114 BC. And in legends transmitted to Spanish priests by Aztecs, this was believed to be the location where time began. where the gods made sacrifices of themselves in order to create the sun and the moon and animate their action in the heavens. In Mesoamerican cosmology, we are in the fifth world. There have been 4 previous worlds with separate suns and moons, and all came to various ends. The 4th world ended because of a series of powerful earthquakes, and at the end of the 4th world, the gods gathered at Teotihuacan, and there they made sacrifices in order to create the sun and the moon. They built a fire, and 2 of the gods leapt into the fire, burning themselves and emerging forth as the sun and the moon. But in order to animate these heavenly bodies, to have them move through the sky and bring life to the world, the other remaining gods had to sacrifice their own blood. And people still need to make sacrifices of blood in order to maintain the movement of the sun and the moon, in order to maintain the power of life in the universe. The grid of the city was defined by apartment compounds, and here is an aerial photo providing an overview of one that has been excavated and partially restored. The outer walls of these compounds defined the streets that led between them and spread as a grid across the city. During the height of the city's occupation, in the 8400s, there were over 2,000 of these apartment compounds. They averaged 60 by 60 meters, and each housed an estimated 60 to 100 people. But unlike modern apartment complexes, these were not 60 to 100 unrelated individuals, different social units that are brought together under the roof of a landlord that they pay rent to. These were 60 to 100 people who were closely associated with one another, related through kinship and marriage, or attached to these households as servants or slaves. Every apartment compound was a single cooperative social unit that worked together economically and politically, as well as religiously. In this detail of the courtyard that the apartment compound surrounds, you can see a miniature pyramid, a place where votive offerings would be made to the gods, within which are perhaps entombed the ancestral founders of this compound, and other descendants of them and ancestors of those who lived in the compound would also be buried within the courtyard. In the 1960s, a very large-scale mapping project was conducted at Teotihuacan, recording in great detail all surface indications of architecture, as well as detailed recording of the artifacts that were also present. As a result of the analyses of the data, several different enclaves of potentially different ethnic groups were found in the city. On the west side, there was the Oaxaca barrio, a neighborhood that had architecture that was more characteristic of Oaxaca to the southeast. There was also pottery that was from Oaxaca. On the east side was the merchants barrio, and there were also differences in the architecture, styles that were more characteristic of the Gulf Coast in modern-day Veracruz, and there was also pottery from this region. So the material culture remains suggests that there were people from these different regions that came and settled within Teotihuacan. In the reading today by T. Douglas Price and Linda Manzanilla, they looked at these barrios and looked not just at the material culture, the architecture, the pottery, but at the remains of the people themselves in order to understand their life histories and their patterns of movement, to try to understand the nature of immigration into the city and the role that it played in its rapid growth. Price and Manzanilla looked at the strontium isotope ratios in the bones and teeth of people from these barrios and from other parts of Teotihuacan. Price and Manzanilla looked at isotope ratios of strontium in the bones and teeth of people from these immigrant barrios and from other contexts at Teotihuacan. Strontium is a very common element in the Earth's crust and is easily incorporated into bone. Strontium has a similar atomic structure to calcium. In fact, it appears directly below it in the periodic table because of these structural similarities. And because of these structural similarities, strontium occasionally substitutes for calcium in the construction of human bones and teeth, substituting for calcium when it forms calcium hydroxyapatite, the main building block in our bones. So we all have some strontium within our bones, primarily calcium, but some strontium. Strontium has 3 different isotopes that occur in different ratios in different geologic deposits depending upon the types of rocks present. And your body would absorb strontium at the same ratios present in the local environment, because strontium is absorbed by plants, it is in the drinking water, and you would have the same strontium ratio as the environment that you lived in. And since these strontium ratios vary across the landscape, it allows us to identify, providing sort of a fingerprint of the location where certain strontium ratios are found. Price and Manzanilla took strontium ratios from both the teeth and the bones, because your teeth are formed at about age 6 when your baby teeth fall out and your adult teeth grow in, and therefore it reflects the strontium ratio of the location where you lived as a child. Your bones, however, are constantly replacing material, and current research suggests that the strontium ratio within the bones at death reflects the last 10 years of the individual's life. Therefore, if they had died in adulthood, their bones would reflect where they lived during their adult life, whereas the teeth reflect where the person was born. And if there are differences in tooth and bone ratios, the person moved during their lifetime. So Price and Manzanilla took several different readings of strontium ratios. They did some from local rabbits to get the baseline signature, because rabbits don't move very much. They looked at later inhabitants of Teotihuacan, because of theories about population movement after the collapse of the city. But primarily they were interested in the immigrant barrios, the merchants barrio and the Oaxaca barrio. And they also ran some analyses of people from Oaxaca, burials that are from the Oaxaca region in a site of Monte Alban. As can be seen in this graph, some of those people who were buried in the merchants barrio have very different tooth and bone isotope ratios, suggesting movement in their lifetime, as do most of the individuals from the Oaxaca barrio. And some of those in the Oaxaca barrio have very similar tooth strontium values as those from the Oaxacan center of Monte Alban. So this would indicate that there was movement from different regions into Teotihuacan, movements of great distances, 200 miles or more, from areas very different culturally, yet people moved into Teotihuacan and settled at the city. However, there were also people buried in these barrios who seemed to have identical tooth and bone ratios, suggesting that they lived their entire lifetimes at Teotihuacan. And this would indicate not only are immigrants coming into these barrios from outside, but some people are born and raised there, yet maintain a social connection and a cultural identity related to the immigrant's homeland, in this case, Oaxaca or Veracruz. In this graph, we have plotted out the ratios of strontium isotopes in the tooth versus the bone, and if they are found on a direct line angling from the bottom left to the upper right, it suggests that the tooth and bone values are relatively the same, indicating that people were born and raised and lived their whole lives in the same location, such as those samples from Monte Alban in the upper right-hand corner, and some of the samples that are in the lower left-hand corner. Those, however, that stretch out along a horizontal line indicate differences, increasing differences as you go from left to right in the strontium ratios of the tooth and the bone, indicating that those individuals moved during their lifetime, immigrating into Teotihuacan from different locations. So why is this important? Ancient cities, like their modern counterparts, were these demographic magnets that attracted people from wide areas who wanted to seek improved economic and social opportunities that are available in these large cities. And the nature of this migration, where people are coming from, where they're maintaining connections to, reveals a lot about the political and economic networks within which the city was embedded. Now, this method of strontium isotope analysis and other methods using oxygen have continued to be applied at Teotihuacan to provide really interesting information about the patterns of movements of various citizens of the city during their lifetime. And in the next lecture, we will hear about how it's been applied to some human sacrifices in understanding the nature of political and military power in Teotihuacan.